Hi, it's Christina with the Sisyphean Journal. Today's August 12th, and I've already covered today's anniversary, which is one of 6 deaths at a particular California abortion hospital. So you can follow the link to that below. But today we're going to look more at Kermit Gosnell, and specifically we are going to look at the regulatory capture that allowed Gosnell to proceed for so long. Now, in the wake of all the stuff you can't mention on YouTube that started in the year 2000, we have been looking a lot at regulatory capture, which is when an industry gets people into key positions in the government organizations that are supposed to be overseeing that industry. So if you just look regulatory capture, and I think you'll find a lot of information about this. Okay? So this is a particularly egregious example of regulatory capture. We discovered that Pennsylvania's Department of Health has deliberately chosen not to enforce laws that should afford patients at abortion clinics the same safeguards and assurances of quality health care as patients of other medical service providers. And this is something you have to keep in mind when you're looking at the abortion lobby. I'm not talking about ordinary pro-choice citizens. I think most ordinary pro-choice citizens would find this stuff appalling. But if you look at the National Abortion Rights Action League, Planned Parenthood, National Abortion Federation, ACLU Reproductive Rights Projects. If you look at these organizations and you look at the politicians that they support, you are going to find great support for this regulatory capture. And any attempt to regulate an abortion clinic is targeted restriction of abortion practice. Okay, so requiring them to have hallways and elevators sized so that you can get a patient out while performing CPR on her. Oh, that's totally not necessary. Don't need that. Don't need that. Yeah. I can't remember the name of the young woman who died because of that, but I'll provide a link to her story below. Okay, even nail salons in Pennsylvania are monitored more closely for client safety. The state legislature has charged the Department of Health, DOH, with responsibility for writing and enforcing regulations to protect health and safety in abortion clinics as well as in hospitals and other healthcare facilities. Yet a significant difference exists between how DOH monitors abortion clinics and how it monitors facilities where other medical procedures are performed. Indeed, the department has shown an utter disregard both for the safety of women who seek treatment in abortion clinics and for the health of fetuses after they have become viable. Well, I gotta say, if it's got anything to do with abortion, the fetus is just supposed to die. Nobody cares about the fetus. Its job is entirely to die. That's the only expectation of an abortion clinic, is that the end result is a dead fetus. State health officials have also shown a disregard for the laws the department is supposed to enforce. Most appalling of all, the Department of Health's neglect of abortion patient safety and of Pennsylvania laws is clearly not inadvertent. It is by design. It is regulatory capture. Many organizations that perform safe abortion procedures do their own monitoring and adhere to strict self-imposed standards of quality. I think they had to throw a bone to Planned Parenthood and the National Abortion Federation, and if you follow my blog and this channel, you'll see that the internal enforcement of all this safety stuff is largely cosmetic. In fact, I think Warren Hearn specifically called NAF's clinical guidelines meaningless and cosmetic, and I'll see if I can find a quote and link to it. But the excellent safety records and quality of care that these independently monitored clinics deliver to patients are no thanks to the Pennsylvania Department of Health. And not all women seeking abortion find their way to one of these high-quality facilities. Some of them end up in a filthy, dangerous clinic such as Gosnell's. Some of them, when they go to one of these high-quality clinics, the National Abortion Federation clinic in Delaware, they wound up handed off to Kermit Gosnell. So even women who did their homework and said, I want someplace that I'm not just relying on the state to oversee it. I want it to be a member of an organization that requires high quality standards for membership. And they get handed off to Gosnell and end up doped within inches of their lives, moaning and writhing on blood-stained recliners wrapped in blankets that might get washed once a week amid the fleas and the cat feces. Yeah, real high, consistent enforcement of those high standards there. Their patients have to depend on DOH oversight to protect them, as do babies born alive and helpless but viable fetuses after 24 weeks of gestation, yet no protection is forthcoming. State health officials knew that Gosnell and his clinics were offering unacceptable medical care to women and girls, yet DOH failed to take any action to stop the atrocities documented by this grand jury. These officials were far more protective of themselves when they testified before the grand jury. Even DOH lawyers, including the chief counsel, brought private attorneys with them, presumably at government expense. Gosnell's clinic, with its untrained staff, its unsanitary conditions and practices, its perilously lax anesthesia protocols, its willingness to perform late-term abortions for exorbitant amounts of cash, and its routine procedure of killing babies after they were delivered by their unconscious mothers, offers a telling example of how horrendous a Pennsylvania facility can be and still operate with DOH approval. The Department of Health conducted sporadic, inadequate inspections for 13 years and then none at all between 1993 and 2010. Witnesses from DOH acknowledged before the grand jury that it is their department's responsibility to oversee clinics such as Gosnell's. Pennsylvania's Abortion Control Act charges DOH with regulating and overseeing the performance of abortions and the facilities where abortions are performed so as to protect the health and safety of women having abortions and of premature babies aborted alive. Abortion facilities require the department's approval to begin operating. The Department of Health first granted approval for the Women's Medical Center to provide abortions at 3801 Lancaster Avenue on December 20th, 1979. The approval followed an on-site review and was good for 12 months. The DOH site review at the time identified a certified obstetrician gynecologist, Joni McGee, as the medical director, with Gosnell listed as a staff physician. The report noted that a registered nurse worked 2 days a week, 4 hours a day, and that lab work was sent to an outside laboratory. Other topics covered in the 1979 site review included counseling for women to be sure they had considered alternatives for abortion and were sure about their decision. This is something that the abortion lobby considers condescending and standing in the way, blocking access, blah, 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 blah. Anything that may lead the woman to say, you know what, I think I need a better job instead of an abortion. That's bad. Okay. The physical facility, whether there was adequate space, whether wheelchairs and stretchers could maneuver through doorways and to the outside, cleaning procedures, emergency preparedness, including the availability of resuscitation equipment and arrangements with an ambulance service and hospital for emergency treatment, and procedures for before, during, and after the operation. It is unclear from the site review who provided most of the information, but much of it appears to come from staff interviews. One significant finding in the 1979 evaluation was that there was adequate access for a stretcher, something that proved not to be the case when EMTs needed to transport Kanamaya Mongar from the facility in November of 2009. And I seriously doubt that that was something that had changed between 1979 and 2009. The building did not mutate into something with tighter and tighter corridors as the years went by. Even though the first DOH certificate of approval for Gosnell's clinic expired on December 20th, 1980, the next documented site review was not conducted until August of 1989. There is a notation in the 1989 report that a review was conducted in February of 1986, but DOH could not provide any documentation of it in response to the grand jury's subpoena. The 1989 evaluation was conducted by Elizabeth Stein and Susan Mitchell. Over 20 years later, Mitchell was part of the team that inspected Gosnell's clinic in February 2010 when law enforcement officials invited the DOH to participate in their search. I would love to know how she felt about this. I really would love to know. Somebody needs to interview this woman, Susan Mitchell. So, By 1989, Gosnell, who is not board certified either as an obstetrician or a gynecologist, was the only doctor at the facility. The DOH site reviewers also noted that there were no nurses working at the clinic. Blood work was no longer sent out to an independent lab, but was done supposedly by medical assistants. And in 7 of the 30 patient files reviewed, there was no lab work recorded. The evaluators noted several violations of Pennsylvania abortion regulations, including no board-certified doctor on staff or contracted as a consultant, no nurses overseeing the recovery of patients, no transfer agreement with a hospital for emergency care, and no lab work recorded in several files. Even so, based on mere promises to improve documentation and filing and to hire nurses, the DOH site reviewers recommended approval of Gosnell's clinic for another 12 months. So presumably they could have said, fix this and then we'll approve you, but they said, whatever, we'll trust you. 2.5 years later, in March 1992, when DOH representatives next inspected the clinic, there were still no nurses to monitor patient recovery. Evaluators Janice Stolowski and Sarah Talencio noted that Gosnell was still the only doctor. Dr. Martin Weisberg was listed as a consultant. That the facility employed no nurses, remember they had promised they'd hire nurses, and that medical assistants were doing lab work. They did indicate that there was adequate access for stretchers and wheelchairs, though it is not clear how they reached this conclusion. The facility is multi-level and has no elevator. There's nothing to suggest that these evaluators reviewed any patient files. Gosnell reported performing 62 second trimester abortions in the previous year, yet the DOH inspectors left blank the section in their report on anesthesia, including who is permitted to give it, what their qualifications are, the type of anesthesia they are permitted to administer. Also left blank was a section titled Post-Operative Care, which addresses the legal requirement that the recovery room be monitored at all times by a registered nurse or a licensed practical nurse under the supervision of a physician. The same regulation that the clinic was cited for violating 3 years earlier. Nevertheless, the evaluators inexplicably concluded on March 12, 1992 that there were no deficiencies, and DOH approved Gosnell's clinic to continue performing abortions. The next inspection was conducted on April 8, 1993 by DOH evaluators Susan Mitchell and Georgette Freed-Wolf. This was also the last site review until February 2010, when an inspection occurred because law enforcement executed search warrants for illegal drug activity. In the 1993 review, Gosnell was the only doctor listed on staff, but Dr. Weisberg was still described as a consultant. 4 years after Gosnell had promised to hire nurses to oversee the recovery room, there was still none. Lab work was still being performed by unspecified medical assistants, whose qualifications the evaluators apparently did not question, since that section of the review was left blank. For the third time, inspectors found the access for stretchers and wheelchairs adequate, even though the facility's layout had become even more convoluted and the building still did not have an elevator. The 1993 site review did not include any first-hand observations about the cleanliness of the facility or the condition of the emergency equipment required for resuscitation. Instead of making their own inspections, the evaluators appear to have relied on representations by staff about procedures for cleaning and checking equipment. They did, however, find drugs past their expiration dates. In reviewing 12 patient files, the surveyors found that 4 involved second trimester abortions. In 3 of these 4 cases, there were no pathology reports on the tissue as required by the Pennsylvania Abortion Control Act. In 1 file, there was no evidence that the tissue was sent to a pathologist at all. In 3 of the 12 files, evaluators found that required lab work was missing. On July 23, 1993, without a follow-up inspection, Susan Mitchell recorded that the deficiencies had been corrected. DOH sent Gosnell another certificate of approval. The certificate stated that it was effective from the first day of April 1993 until March 31, 1994, in accordance with the law. Gosnell's clinic had, on May 1, 1993, submitted an abortion facility registration form to DOH. Whoever filled it out, it is not signed, filled in the name of the facility, Women's Medical Society, and its mailing address, and checked off boxes indicating that the Women's Medical Society had no parent, subsidiaries, or affiliated organizations, and whether or not it had received state funding in the preceding 12 months. During the next 16 plus years, as Gosnell collected fetuses' feet in jars and his office allowed medical waste to pile up in the basement, as he replaced his few licensed medical assistants with untrained workers and a high school student, as his outdated equipment rusted and broke and he routinely reused instruments designed for single use, as he allowed unqualified staff to administer anesthesia and deal with babies born before he arrived at work for the day, and as he caused the deaths of at least 2 patients while continuing to perform illegal third trimester abortions and to kill babies outside their mother's wombs, DOH never conducted another on-site inspection at the Lancaster Avenue facility. The Department of Health failed to investigate Gosnell's clinic even in response to complaints. According to DOH witnesses, sometime after 1993, DOH instituted a policy of inspecting abortion clinics only when there was a complaint. In fact, as this grand jury's investigation makes clear, the department did not even do that. Janice Stolowski, one of the evaluators at Gosnell's clinic in 1992, 10 years later was director of DOH's Division of Home Health, the unit that is inexplicably responsible for overseeing the quality of care in abortion clinics. In January 2002, an attorney representing Shamika Shaw, a 22-year-old woman who had died following an abortion at Gosnell's clinic, wrote to Stolowski requesting copies of inspection reports for any on-site inspections of the clinic conducted by the DOH. Stolowski wrote to the attorney that no inspections had been conducted since 1993 because DOH had received no complaints about the clinic in that time. And it just dawned on me that other than the fact that they were failing to inspect the clinic, this makes it a lot harder for families that are suing after a woman is injured or killed, because you don't have the inspection reports to say, he knew this was wrong, he knew this was wrong, he knew he was cited for this, he was cited for that. You know, the women are like SOL as far as that's concerned. They can't prove that Gosnell knew he wasn't supposed to be doing this. Except that, it said it had received no complaints about the clinic in that time, except that it had. In 1996, another attorney representing a different patient of Gosnell's informed Stolowski's predecessor as director of the Home Health Division that his client had suffered a perforated uterus requiring a radical hysterectomy as a result of Gosnell's negligence. The Home Health Director discussed this patient with DOH Senior Counsel Kenneth Brody, and the complaint report was documented in records turned over to the grand jury. It was surely available to Stolowski when she inaccurately told the attorney in January 2002 that the DOH had received no complaints regarding Gosnell's clinic. Not documented in the records turned over to the grand jury was a second complaint registered between 1996 and 1997. This one was hand-delivered to the Secretary of Health's administrative assistants by Dr. Donald Schwartz, now Philadelphia's health commissioner. Dr. Schwartz, a pediatrician, is the former head of adolescent services at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and was the directing physician of a private practice in West Philadelphia. For 17 years, he treated teenage girls from the West Philadelphia community. Occasionally, he referred patients who wanted to terminate their pregnancies to abortion providers. Gosnell's clinic was originally included as a provider in the referral information that Dr. Schwartz gave to his patients. I really think they should have vetted them first. He and his physician partners noticed, however, that patients who had abortions at Women's Medical Society were returning to their private practice soon after, infected with trichomoniasis, a sexually transmitted parasite that they had not had before the abortions. When this happened repeatedly, Dr. Schwartz sent a social worker to talk to people at Gosnell's facility. Based on the social worker's visit to Women's Medical Society, Dr. Schwartz stopped referring patients to the clinic. Well, that's doing better than the National Abortion Federation, at least. He also hand-delivered a formal letter of complaint to the office of the Pennsylvania Secretary of Health. Dr. Schwartz told the grand jury that he does not know what happened to his complaint. He never heard back from DOH, and the department did not include it in its response to the grand jury subpoena requesting all complaints relating to Gosnell's clinic. We know that no inspection resulted. We are very troubled that the state health officials ignored this respected physician's report that girls were becoming infected with sexually transmitted diseases at Gosnell's clinic when they had abortions there. If Dr. Schwartz's complaint did not trigger an inspection, we are convinced that none would. Well, dead patients didn't trigger an inspection either, did they? We heard testimony from DOH officials who should have been aware of Dr. Schwartz's complaint, Kenneth Brody and Janice Stolowski at the least. Yet they made no mention of it to the grand jury. Did they remember the complaint and choose to exclude it from their testimony? Is ignoring complaints of this seriousness so routine at DOH that they honestly do not remember it? Or did the Secretary of Health never even forward it for action? Of these possible explanations, we are not sure which is the most troubling. In addition to those two complaints filed in 1996 and 1997, Stolosky herself received 2 inquiries from attorneys' offices about Gosnell's clinic in the first 2 months of 2002. One was from the Shaw family's attorney. The other was from a paralegal for yet a third attorney who phoned her on February 6, 2002, asking for information concerning the clinic. Surely these 2 inquiries in 2002 should have alerted Stolosky that there were complaints from at least 2 people about the clinic, complaints serious enough to warrant civil attorney's involvement. Yet she ordered no investigation of the clinic, even though it had not been site reviewed in 9 years. In 2007, Dr. Frederick Hellman, the medical examiner for Delaware County, which is right outside Philadelphia County, reported to DOH the stillbirth of a 30-week-old baby girl. A medical examiner investigator, Irene LaFleur, made the phone calls. She spoke to several DOH employees, including Brody, the senior counsel. The investigator reported to the DOH officials that the medical examiner had conducted an autopsy on the stillborn baby delivered by a 14-year-old girl at Crozier Chester Medical Center. She explained that the baby's delivery had been induced in the course of an abortion performed by Gosnell, and that the medical examiner was concerned because performing an abortion at 30 weeks was a clear violation of the Abortion Control Act. According to the investigator's notes, Brody suggested that the medical examiner inform the district attorney's office in Delaware County for possible referral to Philadelphia, where the procedure occurred, because it was a crime to perform an abortion beyond 24 weeks. Brody said that neither the DOH nor the state medical board had any authority over the matter. They did. The senior counsel did ask the investigator to keep him informed. The investigator's note suggests that Brody told her that once the district attorney acted, then the medical board could get involved. Brody was correct to refer Dr. Hellman to the district attorney to prosecute the abortion of the 30-week pregnancy as a crime. However, that did not absolve DOH of its responsibility. The information provided by Dr. Hellman's investigator should have been received as a complaint to DOH. The department should have initiated an investigation. The DOH could have revoked the clinic's license without waiting for a criminal prosecution that might never and did not happen. Yet no one from the department went to investigate Gosnell's clinic. Okay, we're over 20 minutes, so we're going to pick this up on another day.